Hello and welcome back to another edition of GNAT-TV's In-Depth series. I'm Andrew McKeever. Today is Thursday, June 19th, and it's a pleasure to be joined in our studio today by Mardi Crane-Godreau, who is a resident of Arlington. She's also a member of the town's Energy Committee. She's also a former assistant professor at Dartmouth
Geisel.
It's School of
Dr.
Medicine.
Seuss.
See, I told you I was going to mangle
Seuss.
that one. Geisel School of Medicine at Dartmouth.
Yes, yes.
Okay, got it. And she's here to talk to us about some of her experiences recently with long COVID and also dementia and Alzheimer's. So Marty, great to have you here. Thank you very much for making the time for this conversation.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Well, we've had the chance to talk a little bit about some of your recent experiences over the past few years, and really fascinating stuff. You also have a Substack column or whatever that folks can go to after they finish listening to us, and because they're not going to be this. They'll want to start reading your stuff on Substack. I can guarantee you.
Yeah, it would be great because there's too much for a person to really absorb this all. I don't want people there, with a pen and paper trying to record this. Everything that I'm going to talk about today is already on Substack, and even a certain amount of information about what my own experience was with having COVID and then long COVID.
So I thought that would be a good place to start. Your experience with long COVID, and you came down with that right at the very beginning of the whole COVID pandemic back in March of 2020. Tell us about what that was like. I mean, that really sounds, from what I've read of it, like a really scary
It is.
experience.
Of course, most people didn't really have an appreciation for what COVID could do to you. And we were beginning to get reports from China that there were a lot of really sick people, that people had died of this disease. And I had been careful when I was out in public, but in the early part of March, I'd been over to Dartmouth and I had been to a grocery store. So where this came from, I don't know. But I woke up in the middle of the night coughing. And my husband was elderly and had COPD. And so I grabbed my pillows and blankets and headed for the living room. Well, apparently wasn't early enough to get away, because 5 days later he came down with COVID as well. And that was in mid-March of 2020. Both of us were originally sick for about, I would say, 2 weeks. And like many viral infections, viruses are kind of tricky little disease-causing organisms. You'll have symptoms, and then they might wane, and then you'll have another wave of symptoms. And that was my experience. But I was sick originally, as I say, for about 2 or 3 weeks. I tried hard to get tested, and basically was told that unless I'd been to Japan or Europe, that they weren't going to test me. So by the time I finally did get a test, which was sometime, I think, in late April. Of course, I had no virus left to test for, and they considered it to be negative. But there was no question in my mind what was going on. And, to give you and the audience an appreciation, my background, I'm trained as a mucosal immunologist. I'm a graduate of Dartmouth Medical School as a research scientist. And so understanding the effects of microbial disease on people was something that I was already familiar with. So anyway, basically, I didn't get well. And that, of course, started, as I say, in March. And over the months, I remember it was probably, I don't know, maybe 6 months in, I went and I was actually putting my clothes in the dryer, and I normally use a little bit of lavender on a little pillow to, help make the laundry smell good. And I smelled the lavender pillow, and I thought, ooh, that's stale. I can't smell any lavender. So I put some more lavender on, and I tried smelling it again. And I just realized at that point I'd lost my sense of smell. At about the same time, I was losing my hair. I lost about, I want to say, a third of my hair, and then the hair that was left and continued to grow was very thin. It wasn't, the nice robust sort of thing, and that actually wasn't just on my head. Anywhere else on my body where there was hair began to disappear. The fatigue and brain fog were other symptoms that they began with, if you can imagine trying to use your mind and thinking it was like swimming through pea soup. It was like stuff just wasn't working. I could not have had a conversation like this at that period. The ability to use words, to think thoughts through, it just evaporated.
And is memory affected?
Oh yeah.
You can't remember
what
something you're supposed to do or what you did last week.
And it's even worse than that. It's things like distant memories were also, things that ought to be right forefront in your mind. Just, they were very hard to find. I was able to read. I did read a few novels. I spent weeks on the sofa, literally. I was just, exhausted all the time. I did manage to cook and things like that for my husband and myself, but I was I was sick from the get-go. I've had people ask, well, didn't that happen because of the vaccine? No, there were no vaccines then. The vaccines didn't appear until almost a year after COVID had actually begun, the pandemic had begun in the United States. So those symptoms, I would very much say were, unquestionably from the virus.
Has there been any research done as to why some people got the long COVID version if they got sick, whereas other people, after a week or two, by resting and just taking it easy would essentially recover?
Right, and there's another class of people, Andrew, people who were, let's call it invisible cases of COVID. They may have actually had COVID, but had it's such a mild case that it appeared that they never had the disease. They have found people who say they did not have COVID, and yet they have the antibodies in their system, and it's not the antibodies that would have come from a vaccine. So, there's that class of people as well. It's a very interesting and complex sort of thing. One is that we make our own antimicrobials, antibiotics. Our body's making these all the time. And one of the things that we secrete from the lungs and the mucosa in our nose and even our mouth is a molecule that's called LL37. Now, I don't want you to have to worry about remembering that, but this wonderful little molecule, actually it has another name, cathelicidin, is what protects us against diseases like tuberculosis. And so normally, if a person has this adequately in their lungs and so on, and they come in contact with a disease like TB, they're protected. But that particular molecule is its production is controlled by the presence of vitamin D. Vitamin D is a transcription factor. Most people think of it as a vitamin. Well, it is a vitamin, but it's also controls over 2,000 genes in our body. So one of the answers to your question has to do with the presence of vitamin D. But even if you had enough vitamin D and you were making lots of LL37 or cathelicidin, and you were being exposed to bad air, and by that I mean small particles that you were breathing in, that wonderful little molecule that should be protecting you against a virus would have been grabbing onto those particles in your respiratory tract. And in fact, one of the things that led me to write a paper that I did manage to do this, I must have had enough time when I was lucid, so I was able to do it. It was difficult, but I got it done. I started seeing on the internet where the big clusters of COVID were, where people were dying, and many of them were downwind from industrial sites. If you actually look at the air quality in the Bronx, where we had huge numbers of people that were dying. If you look at the areas in Iran, the people who were downwind from the oil refineries. If you look in China, it was the same thing. It was people where they were reporting this, it was people who were downwind of industry. And in Italy, the Po Valley in northern Italy, big industrial areas, that's where people were dying. And in other areas where the air was cleaner, people seemed to have a more even probability of getting sick and actually developing disease. So actually I published a paper that was on the topic of this particular molecule and the importance of two things, having adequate vitamin D, but also clean air. So your people who were wearing masks were actually in some ways protecting themselves in two different ways, not just against viruses, but also against air particle pollution. So there are all of these different factors. We could probably talk for an entire hour just about COVID. Right. But to make a long story short about how this has led me actually here today and into other things that I've been doing, I started, by 2022, I had regained enough of my health so that I could seriously start thinking about what the causes of long COVID were. And I'm not talking about just talking about the virus. What does the virus do biologically? Right. So that's where I went with it. And I started writing in late 2022 on Substack about what I was finding. And what I'd found was that research scientists were showing that when this virus enters a cell, it homes to a particular organelle that's called a mitochondria. And that's the part of the cells that make energy for us. It makes our ATP.
Are we seeing the same numbers of cases of long COVID happening now, or has that basically receded as the virus in general has receded? But I mean, it seems like such a different variant of that I found myself wondering if this is still going on. You're just not hearing that much about it anymore.
It's definitely still going on. Some of the scientists who study this, and the doctors in epidemiology and so on, in the beginning they said long COVID, maybe 5% of the population who had COVID. Now they say as many as 30% of all the people who had COVID may have it, and the probability of actually developing long COVID increases each time you get COVID. So many of us, and including me, I have tried to stay healthy and not expose myself, but I've had COVID 3 times now. And the last 2 times it was very mild, but it, inevitably is a risk factor. I think, though, that the strategy that I developed, and when I say I developed this, I used information that was published by other authors, peer-reviewed articles in the scientific journals. How do you protect your mitochondria? And I basically started following a protocol that I designed for myself and my husband, and I started getting better. In fact, if people want to read, within 3 days of changing my diet and going on to a group of supplements, most of my symptoms were significantly reduced.
Well, I'd like to talk about that a little bit further, but first I also just wanted to, before we go there, have you tell us a little bit about your experiences with dementia and Alzheimer's as well. I mean, I guess that's kind of similar. I mean, I suppose in the popular mind, dementia sounds a lot like long COVID, brain fog and forgetfulness, and you just don't remember stuff. But is it roughly comparable?
Well, let's use some different terms. The word Alzheimer's is a term kind of like cancer, like there's lots of different kinds of cancers, some of them very benign and some of them very dangerous. Alzheimer's is a term that's been loosely used to refer to dementia, but that's not really the way that Alzheimer's is a disease that, according to what I understand, this is changing because there's some changes that have happened in terms of diagnostics. But previously, the only way to diagnose someone with true Alzheimer's was with an autopsy. So it's after you die. But dementia is a symptom of Alzheimer's, and there are also different kinds of Alzheimer's. There's some very early onset, people in their 30s and 40s who can develop it. And other people, will say sometimes casually, a person might say, oh, grandpa's got Alzheimer's. Well, maybe grandpa doesn't really have Alzheimer's. Grandpa may have some, let's call it senile dementia.
Cognitive decline?
Cognitive decline, but it may or may not have anything to do with classical Alzheimer's. And the other thing is that there is an overlap, if you will, of what scientists are now showing, excuse me, showing as where there's similar physiology in the brain. I began to talk a little bit about mitochondria. Well, all of our cells, every cell in our body has mitochondria, and it's there for the purpose. The thing that we think about is energy, so it makes ATP, the energy molecule, but it also does a number of other things. For example, it's part of the innate, as opposed to active or adaptive immune system. It's very important in fighting off viral infections. And then another thing that it does is that it helps with the transport of calcium. And I know that's getting into the weeds, but the movement of calcium in and out of cells is a critical part of what keeps us alive. Also, when a cell is damaged, when the DNA of a cell is damaged, the mitochondria have the capacity to recognize that and tell the cell that it should self-destruct. It's called apoptosis. So these mitochondria are really critical. Well, COVID, the SARS-CoV-2 bad guy, comes into the cell, and where does it go? It goes straight to the mitochondria and hangs on the inside of these little mitochondria. There's also another area in the cell called the endoplasmic reticulum, but we don't need to worry about that right now. Anyway, so they're hanging out there, and they're stealing the energy that's supposed to be taking care of the host, but instead the viruses are taking it to use it to replicate so that they can move on. Well, this is the battle that's going on inside the body when your body is trying to recover from a viral infection, most viral infections. But the same thing, the damage that these viruses can do, when this battle goes on, there's inflammation. I'm going to just use that word instead of getting into all of the technical details. That inflammation can damage the DNA inside mitochondria. Mitochondria have their own DNA that is separate from our DNA that we're general, that are, most of the genes that we think of. When the DNA is mutated, damaged, it makes it so you don't have all of these jobs, all of the things that the mitochondria need to do. So you don't have energy. Your brain is like, I don't have any energy to think. I'm just going to go to sleep. That sort of thing. Many functions of the body slow down or don't work very well. I mean, people have, I think there are over 100 symptoms that have been recorded as being associated with long COVID. So what I did for us, for my husband who was in his 80s and I'm in my late 70s, so anyway, I started taking care of my mitochondria, and that's what I write about on Substack.
And diet apparently is a big factor here.
Incredibly important.
What you're eating is kind of an important part of the pathway to recovery.
It is. The issues there have to do with two things. One, providing the nutrients that you need, but the other part of it is staying away from foods that ultimately are going to feed into more inflammation in your body. You want to stop inflammation. Inflammation is the enemy of good health. I mean, it's something that we can control. It's something that is best controlled by lifestyle and diet, to be honest. And again, these are things that, that I talk about a lot in what I write. I'm sure that you and probably listeners have had their doctors tell them, that they need to change their diets.
What do you mean?
Yeah, I mean, it's the Mediterranean diet is really the diet that has been demonstrated as having an impact on reducing the risk of cognitive decline. I want to say that again. The Mediterranean diet has been studied and has been shown to reduce the risk of dementia and cognitive decline.
So when we say Mediterranean diet, that's what, vegetables, pasta?
Well, basically green leafy vegetables, and there are a lot of them. They're the things that we normally put in salad, but there's, kale and other beet greens and so on. In the South, people eat collards and so on. But then other fresh vegetables, fruits. In fact, all of your vegetables are part of the Mediterranean diet. In terms of protein, eggs, fish, and poultry. Generally, the Mediterranean diet stays away from beef and the other red types of meat. And olive oil is an incredibly important part of it. Olive oil by itself has also been studied and has been shown to have biological effects that reduce inflammation. And I know that the studies that I've read show the reduction of inflammation. I'm not sure whether I've seen studies that also show that it would increase lifespan. But the fact that it's reducing inflammation, I mean, everything from your sore hands, your knees, your back, any of those things as we age, you know, like, why are my joints so uncomfortable? But also, why am I aging? Why am I forgetting things? And these mitochondria that we're talking about are in all of the cells in your nervous system. If they're damaged either by a virus or by lifestyle, and there are other things in lifestyle, certainly tobacco use, any of the other substances have a potential to cause damage, various types of pollution, toxins that we tend to try to avoid. They're all part of the things that keeping away from those things and trying to create a lifestyle around a Mediterranean diet is just a really, really important first step, you know, in getting there.
Before we have to run, I wanted to just ask about one other area here, and that's the role of stress in all of this. You know, while recovering from dementia or long COVID, or just adopting a generally healthy kind of lifestyle. I mean, it's easy for probably all of us to have to get stressed out every now and then about one thing or another, but you know, is sort of being aware of and managing stress kind of a piece of working your way back to whatever normal is.
Right. It's a two-way issue. Believe it or not, there's a level of stress that's actually good for us. You know, there's the ways that we challenge ourselves in sports and that sort of thing. Good kinds of competition. That actually is a stress. That's called eustress. And then there's distress. Okay. And
we all know about that.
We all know about it. And basically, you're looking at two issues that we're talking about. One is recovering, and the other is prevention. One of the things that I wrote in my Substack was about, it was actually, my husband ultimately did develop some level of dementia, although it had mixed symptoms. He, on one hand, could play a phenomenal game of chess and do crosswords, but no longer could paint, or he couldn't remember when we were married. But he could remember friends. He was still able to go to an occasional dinner party. So it was a mixed bag. So there's a lot of things that, in looking at stress, what are we doing with what is the stress doing to us? What are we able to do to deal with stress? And let me just back up here for a second. Right now, we're living in a very stressful environment. I don't think anybody would would question that. There's a lot of things happening around nearly everyone. So one of the things that, one of my pieces that I've written is called Finding Anchors in the Face of Stress. And what I talk about are things like, first of all, if there is a stressor that you are aware of, your brain perceives it differently if it's just sort of coming at you versus if you literally name it. When you name it, your brain looks at it differently. It's something that's now in a box. You have control over it, or its effect on you. You may not control what's causing the stress, but in terms of its effect on you, you become the one who's in control. So that's one of the most important strategies in terms of dealing with generalized stress. And I don't care whether it's a coworker at the office who's difficult. I mean, you can just kind of, do the body language thing, or you can go, okay, my coworker, blah, blah, blah. And you don't have to react to it, but if you can acknowledge it, that's an important thing. And this, one of the other things that I know that you've actually read and I've written about, and that has to do with bullying. And the same thing has to do with bullying. When you actually acknowledge that there is an individual or a group of individuals that are engaging in bullying, there's, again, a lot of information out there as to what causes that kind of behavior. But being able to recognize it for what it is, and educate yourself, educate your co-workers or the others, in your family, whatever the situation is, it's dependent on that sort of thing. But these are things that it's important for the individual to take charge. But there are other things you can do. Get outside and go for a walk. Get away from your computer. Shut off the news feeds, wherever they're coming from.
Take a break.
Take a break from it, absolutely. Get together with friends, pickleball, playing cards, have
Coffee.
Dinner, whatever. And the other thing is, I'm a great believer in meditative movement types of activities, whether it's yoga, Tai Chi, Qigong. All of those things are fantastic. And there's a reason for this. If you're doing a sport where you're really focused on the sport, your mind, your focus is on that activity. Whether it's how you're holding your racket, or if you're doing something like Qigong, you're in your body. If you're focused on your breathing, you're focused on your breathing. Your brain can't do two things at once. You can think you can, but you actually can't. So if you're focused on body awareness, you can't ruminate. And rumination, that is rethinking things, for those who might not know what rumination is. Rethinking, churning, worrying about things. That's a very destructive pattern. And being able to recognize that you're ruminating is another important step. So as a relief from stress, learning to do these various types of activities where your body is what you are actually paying attention to. And the same thing when you're going to sleep at night, if you're, tossing and turning because, you've got this little cartoon and that little cartoon and, all these thoughts about, tomorrow, blah, blah, blah. No. You've got to walk away from that. There are breathing exercises that you can do. There's Qigong exercises that you can do. I can usually go to sleep in about 3 or 4 breaths. And it's...
Okay, we got to talk some more.
Okay.
I could have used that advice last night.
Okay.
So that's interesting. So recognizing the source of the stress for what it is really one of the keys to saying, okay, how important is this really? And maybe, now that I've seen that the reason for my stress is somebody is annoying me for something or another, or I've got too many things to do tomorrow, helps you go, all right, we can make it. We'll get through this.
Yes.
All right. Well, I think that might be a good place to leave our conversation today. Boy, there's so much more we could talk about, which means we'll have to have you back again, I guess.
Well, we'll do that. We'll do that. I'd love to come
all
back.
this stuff further, but we'll leave it there for today. But
Could I just mention, to your audience that beginning next week, next Thursday, I'm going to be teaching a free Qigong class at Arlington Common in Arlington on Thursday afternoons. And you can check the Arlington Common website for that. And the other thing is, if these topics are interesting to you, my Substack can be found. There are different ways to find it. One is just Mardi Crane-Godreau, M-A-R-D-I, Crane, C-R-A-N-E -Godreau. Look that, and the word Substack, you can look that up on Google, or the URL is long COVID journey and then the number 2 wellness at Substack. And I'd love to, the subscriptions are free. The information is there as a way to offer more information that helps with health literacy, which is a really important thing for all of us.
all right. Well,
So
Mardi
thank
Crane-Godreau,
you.
thank you very much for making the time
Nice
for
to
this.
see you, Andrew. Thank you
And,
for your time.
Really interesting stuff. Well, okay. Thank you all for being with us today. Hope you found the conversation interesting. I sure did. We'll see you again next time. Take care.